Jackson had never been to a planet like this before. The sky was a dull shade of purple, with strange clouds floating in the air, and the ground was covered in a thick, moss-like material that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. The air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar flowers, and the trees were tall and twisted, unlike anything he had seen back on Earth. He was here on a mission, but everything around him felt strange and unsettling. His mission was clear. He was a soldier, part of a covert unit sent to observe an alien species. His orders were simple: gather information and report back. But as he stepped through the thick brush of the alien jungle, something didn't feel right. The deep silence, the stillness, was too unnatural. He had been walking for hours, following the encrypted signal of an alien device that his commanders believed was vital. Jackson kept his weapon close, scanning the area with careful eyes. His heart raced, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching him. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he paused for a moment, listening to the silence that surrounded him. Then he heard it. A soft, almost inaudible sound. A faint cry. At first, he thought it was just an animal, some kind of alien creature. But something told him it wasn't. His instincts, honed from years of military training, told him to investigate. Carefully, he made his way toward the sound. His boots sank slightly into the soft, glowing ground as he moved. The trees parted, revealing a small clearing. There, lying on the ground, was an alien girl. She looked human in many ways, but there was something different about her. Her skin was a pale shade of green, and her eyes, when they fluttered open, were a bright, glowing blue. She seemed fragile, trembling slightly, as though she was barely holding on to life. Blood stained the dirt around her, and she clutched her side, trying to stop the bleeding with her hands. But it was clear that the injury was severe. Jackson knelt down beside her, his heart pounding. He had never seen anything like her before. But his military training kicked in. He quickly checked her pulse, weak but steady. "You're not going to die here," he muttered to himself, more to reassure himself than her. He had no idea who she was, or why she was on this planet alone, but he knew he had to help her. Her eyes flickered as she looked up at him, and her voice was barely a whisper. "Please, help me." Jackson didn't hesitate. He tore off part of his shirt and used it to bind it, leave her behind. There was something about her. Something that made him feel a strange sense of responsibility. She had fallen unconscious by the time he reached a small cave, a safe enough place to hide for a while. Jackson gently set her down, his mind still, racing. Who was she? What was her species? Why had she been injured so badly? As the minutes passed, Jackson kept watch, constantly looking over his shoulder, his finger on the trigger of his weapon. He didn't know if the enemy was still following him or if they had just been lucky enough to evade them. The girl stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open again. She looked at him, confusion in her gaze. "Where am I?" Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. Jackson hesitated for a moment. He didn't know how to explain it to her. "You're safe," he said simply. "For now." She tried to sit up but winced in pain. Jackson moved to stop her, but she shook her head. I can't stay here. I have to go back." "Back to where?" Jackson asked, his tone firm but gentle. He wasn't about to let her wander off in her condition. Her eyes glazed over as if she were trying to gather her thoughts, but the words didn't come immediately. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice shaking. "My name is Zarina," she said, "and I am the heir to the throne of the Clarith Empire. But they're after me. My family, they betrayed me." Jackson's eyes narrowed as he processed. The information. An alien princess. But what did this all mean? He had no time to ask further questions. For now, they were both stuck in the jungle together, and Jackson had to protect her, whether he liked it or not. The future of both of them depended on what would happen next. Zarina's eyes remained fixed on Jackson, her expression distant as though she was trying to gather her thoughts. Her voice was fragile, like a soft breeze, but each word carried a heavy weight. "I am the heir to the Clarath Empire," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But it doesn't matter now. They want me dead." Jackson sat across from her, his hands still gripping the weapon tightly, but his mind was focused on the young alien girl who had just revealed the impossible. A princess. In all his years of training, he had never imagined he would find himself protecting royalty from an enemy who might very well be far more dangerous than anything he had faced before. Zarina winced as she tried to sit up straighter, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The wound on her side was still bleeding, though more slowly now thanks to the makeshift bandage he had applied earlier. But Jackson knew it wouldn't be enough. She needed real medical help, and fast. His mind raced as he weighed his options. There was no way to get her back to his ship. They were miles away from the nearest base, and the chances of surviving another attack from whatever enemies had pursued her were slim. "I don't understand," Jackson said after a long pause, his voice soft. "What happened to your people? Why are they after you?" Zarina's eyes flickered, a momentary flash of fear crossing her features before she spoke. "My family. They betrayed me. They don't care about me anymore. I was supposed to be the next ruler of the Clarath Empire, but my cousin, he's taken control. He wants me gone, dead. The power, it's all he cares about." Jackson nodded, trying to make sense of it all. He had heard of the Clarath Empire, though not much about its inner workings. The Empire was known for its advanced technology and their ability to manipulate psychic energy. They were a proud people, and their culture was based on a strict hierarchy: rulers at the top and everyone else beneath them. But Jackson had never heard of such betrayal happening within their royal family. It was all too complicated and foreign to him. "You must be important," Jackson said. "If they're going to all this trouble to kill you, it means you have something they want." Zarina looked down at her hands, trembling slightly. "I have abilities," she said slowly, her voice quiet but filled with a strange sadness. "Abilities that are unique to me. My family doesn't understand them. They fear them." She paused, her voice breaking. "I can feel things. Things that no one else can. Emotions. Thoughts. When I touch someone, when they touch me, I can hear their deepest secrets. I can even connect with their minds." Jackson's eyes widened. It wasn't just psychic powers. It was something much more. He had never heard of a species with such an ability. The very idea that someone could reach into another's mind and control or influence them in such a personal way was terrifying. "I don't understand," Jackson said. "How does that make you a threat?" Zarina closed her eyes for a moment, as if she was reliving some painful memory. "Because when the bond is formed, it's not just a one-way thing," she explained. "When I connect with someone, they connect with me as well. I can hear their thoughts, feel their emotions, and so can they. It's like we become part of each other." Jackson didn't know how to respond. He had been trained to fight enemies, to track down hostile targets, to survive in hostile conditions, but nothing could have prepared him for this. The idea that he, a simple human soldier, could be linked to an alien princess in such an intimate way was overwhelming. He couldn't help but think of how fragile Zarina was. Even though she was royalty, even though her people were technologically superior, she was still just a girl, alone, frightened, and on the run from her own blood. But as much as Jackson wanted to get away from the situation, he knew he couldn't leave her. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. "Are you saying that I'm connected to you now?" Jackson asked, his voice tight with uncertainty. Zarina nodded, her eyes dark with both fear and resignation. Yes, we're connected, but I don't know how long you can survive it. Jackson stared at her, unsure of what to feel. The bond was real. He could sense it now, and it terrified him. But he couldn't turn his back on her. Not now. He had already made a choice, and he would see it through, no matter the cost. The silence between them grew heavy, the weight of the situation pressing down on both of them. Jackson knew they couldn't stay here much longer. He had to get Zarina somewhere safe. But the question was, where? The Empire's enemies were still out there, and they would stop at nothing to finish what they had started. They had to move. But first, Jackson had to figure out how to survive the bond with Zarina, and how to protect her from the dangers ahead. Jackson looked out from the mouth of the cave, his eyes scanning the thick jungle beyond. The wind rustled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a strange animal's cry echoed. It wasn't just the environment that felt unsettling. It was everything. The bond with Zarina, the weight of his decision to protect her, and the constant fear of being hunted by enemies who wanted them both dead. Jackson had always been good at handling danger. But this was something entirely different. Zarina had fallen asleep, her breathing slow but steady. Despite her fragile appearance, she seemed to be recovering, though not nearly enough. Her body was still weak from the injury, and the blood loss had taken its toll. Jackson knew it wouldn't be long before they had to move again, but for now, he had a few moments to think. He sat against the cave wall, his mind racing. The bond between them was growing stronger with every passing minute. Jackson could feel Zarina's emotions more clearly now, her fear, her pain, and even her confusion. But he also felt something else, a sense of connection. It was as if they were sharing more than just their thoughts and feelings. He didn't know how it worked, or how long it would last, but he couldn't deny it. There was something between them now, something powerful and undeniable. As he sat there, lost in thought, he heard a soft rustling behind him. He turned to find Zarina awake, her eyes focused on him. She looked drained, but there was a determination in her gaze. "I know we have to leave," she said quietly, her voice weak but resolute. "The danger isn't over yet." Jackson nodded, standing up to help her. She had been through so much, but she was still here, still fighting. It made him respect her even more. "We'll move as soon as you're ready," he said, offering her a hand. Zarina took his hand, slowly getting to her feet. She winced as she shifted, the pain from her wound still fresh, but she didn't let it stop her. "I can feel them," she said softly, looking over her shoulder as though she could sense the danger lurking. "The ones who are after me, they're getting closer." Jackson frowned. He had hoped they could make it a bit longer before the next fight, but Zarina's instincts were sharper than his. If she could sense the enemy, then they had to act fast. "Where can we go?" Jackson asked. "Where do we hide?" Zarina closed her eyes for a moment, as if concentrating. "There's an old shelter," she said finally, her voice tinged with a mixture of hope and fear. "It's not far from here, but it's hidden. Only a few know of it, only my closest advisors. It's safe, for now." Jackson didn't hesitate. If Zarina trusted it, then it was their best option. He helped her gather what little supplies they had, and together they made their way out of the cave. The jungle seemed even more hostile now, the trees closing in around them as if to trap them. But Jackson kept moving forward, keeping a steady pace as Zarina walked beside him. Despite her exhaustion, she stayed strong, her eyes focused ahead. As they moved deeper into the jungle, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every crack of a twig, every whisper of the wind, felt like it could be the enemy closing in. He kept his hand on the hilt of his weapon, ready for whatever might come. But he had no idea what they were up against. Zarina had mentioned enemies, but she had never explained who they were. Were they soldiers? Mercenaries? His mind raced with questions, but for now there was only one thing he could focus on: getting Zarina to safety. They walked for what felt like hours, the dense jungle making it hard to judge the time. But finally, they reached a clearing, and in the center, hidden beneath thick vines, was a small, seemingly abandoned structure. It wasn't much to look at, just a stone building with a few windows, overgrown with moss and vegetation. But to Zarina, it was a sanctuary. Jackson helped her inside, and they found a small room at the back of the building. Zarina collapsed onto the floor, breathing heavily. "This will do for now," she said, her voice strained. "We can rest here, but not for long." Jackson nodded, keeping watch as Zarina lay down. He still couldn't shake the feeling that danger was closing in on them. He wasn't sure what they were up against, but he knew they couldn't stay in one place for too long. The enemy would be relentless, and they were bound to come looking for Zarina. As the minutes ticked by, Jackson couldn't help but notice how quiet the jungle had become. The usual sounds of wildlife, the rustling of leaves, the distant calls, of strange creatures, all of it had stopped. It was too quiet. It didn't feel right. Zarina seemed to sense it too. She sat up, her eyes scanning the darkness outside the room. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They've found us." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. He had been waiting for this moment, but he wasn't prepared for how quickly it had come. "How many?" he asked, his voice low. Zarina closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind. For a moment, she seemed to be listening to something only she could hear. Then she opened her eyes, her face pale. "Too many." Jackson's grip tightened on his weapon. He had to act fast. "We'll fight," he said, his voice steady. "We'll take them down, one by one." Zarina nodded, though she looked unsure. She had already been through so much. The bond between them was stronger now, and Jackson could feel her fear, her uncertainty. But he wouldn't let her face this alone. He couldn't. With a final glance at Zarina, Jackson moved to the entrance of the shelter, peering out into the dense jungle. They weren't alone. The enemy was coming, and they had to be ready. The sound of footsteps in the jungle grew louder. Jackson's heart pounded in his chest as he crouched low by the entrance, his weapon ready. The air was thick with tension. He could hear the faint rustling of leaves, the quiet movement of soldiers, or whatever they were, getting closer. Zarina, still lying on the floor, her body weak from the wound, looked up at him with wide eyes. Zarina shook her head slowly, her blue eyes filled with determination. "No, Jackson. We have to fight together. I can't let you do this alone." Her words were firm, but Jackson could sense the anxiety beneath them. She was scared. Scared for her life. Scared for his. And yet, there was something in her voice that told him she was also ready to fight. Jackson didn't argue. He had seen her strength in the way she had pushed through pain and fear to get this far. She might be injured, but she was not weak. He just had to make sure they both survived this. "All right," he said quietly, his voice a promise. "But stay close. We need to move fast." They both positioned themselves in the shadows near the entrance, the dense jungle providing some cover. Jackson could hear the enemy now, moving in tight formation, their footsteps careful and deliberate. They were searching for something, or someone. The thought of Zarina being found sent a chill through his spine. Zarina's powers might be extraordinary, but even she couldn't take on a whole squad of trained soldiers, not in her condition. The connection between them had drained her more than she realized. Jackson had to be the one to protect her. He had to be the one to make sure they escaped. But that didn't mean he was going to let them walk all over her. She was a princess. She had a right to fight back, just as much as he did. Jackson peered through the vines, watching as two figures moved past, their weapons raised, scanning the surroundings. They were closing in. Too close. He held his breath, waiting for the perfect moment. "Now," he whispered, just as the soldiers passed by the shelter. Zarina's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Jackson felt the familiar rush of power that came with her psychic connection. He wasn't sure if it was her ability to sense danger or if it was something else entirely, but the moment felt like a spark of energy between them. With a sudden movement, Zarina stood up, her body trembling, but determined. She raised her hand, and without a word, the air around them seemed to ripple. The soldiers closest to the shelter stopped dead in their tracks. Jackson reacted instantly, moving forward with lightning speed. He caught one of the soldiers off guard, knocking him to the ground with a swift strike. The other soldier turned in surprise, but it was too late. Jackson was on him in a heartbeat, disarming him and delivering a powerful blow to incapacitate him. The soldier fell unconscious, crumpling to the ground with a soft thud. But more were coming. As Jackson moved to take cover, Zarina's voice filled his mind. She was no longer speaking aloud, but he could hear her words clearly, as if they were his own thoughts. "They're coming from behind. They know we're here." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. He spun around, his eyes searching for any sign of movement. He didn't have to wait long. A third soldier, this one more heavily armed, emerged from the shadows, his weapon raised and aimed directly at Zarina. Without thinking, Jackson launched himself at the soldier, knocking him off balance and sending the weapon flying. The soldier scrambled to reach for a sidearm, but Jackson was faster. He grabbed the soldier's wrist, twisting it until the weapon clattered to the ground. A quick punch to the soldier's face, and he went down with a grunt. Zarina, still shaken but determined, stepped forward, her eyes glowing faintly as she used her powers to restrain the remaining soldiers. They froze, their limbs paralyzed by her telekinetic grip. Jackson couldn't help but admire the ease with which she wielded her abilities, even in her weakened state. But there was no time for admiration. "We need to move." "Now," Jackson urged, looking around the jungle for any other signs of danger. The sound of footsteps could still be heard in the distance, but there was no sign of immediate danger. At least not yet. Zarina nodded, her face pale but resolute. She had done what she could, but the energy drain from using her powers was obvious. She was still recovering from the earlier wound, and now, using her telekinesis, she looked close to exhaustion. "Are you okay?" Jackson asked, keeping his voice low as he offered her a hand. Zarina gave him a small, strained smile. "I'll be fine, but we need to get out of here before more of them arrive," Jackson agreed. They couldn't stay here much longer. Even if they had taken down a few soldiers, there were still too many more out there. The jungle was dangerous, but it was the only place where they could hope to survive for now. As they moved deeper into the jungle, Jackson stayed alert, his yes, scanning every movement. Zarina was walking beside him, her steps slower now, but still steady. The bond between them had only grown stronger in the past few hours. He could feel her exhaustion, but he could also feel her determination. She was still fighting, and so was he. They had no choice but to keep moving. The Empire's soldiers would not stop. They would track them down, no matter where they went. But Jackson had made a promise, and he intended to keep it. He would protect her, no matter the cost. The dense jungle seemed to close in around them, as Jackson and Zarina moved quickly through the underbrush. The air was thick with humidity, and every step felt like it took them deeper into a world they could barely understand. They had left the shelter behind, but the fear that had followed them never truly left. It lingered in the back of Jackson's mind, a constant reminder that they weren't safe yet. The soldiers would be on their trail, and with each passing moment, they were getting closer. Zarina's pace had slowed, and Jackson could feel the weight of her exhaustion. Her energy had been drained by the psychic connection they shared, and the strain of using her powers had left her more vulnerable than ever. She was doing her best to keep up, but Jackson knew she needed rest. "Stop for a moment," Jackson said quietly, his voice low but firm. They had been moving for hours, and they both needed a break. Zarina nodded, though she didn't speak. She sat down on a large rock nearby, her breathing shallow. Jackson knelt beside her, his eyes scanning the jungle for any signs of danger. "You need to rest," Jackson said, his tone softer now. He wasn't used to being concerned for someone else, but there was something about Zarina that made him feel responsible for her well-being. "We can't keep going like this." Zarina looked at him, her eyes tired but filled with gratitude. "I'll be fine," she said, though her voice was shaky. "But we don't have much time. They'll be looking for us." Jackson didn't argue. He had no doubt that the enemy would keep hunting them. But for now they had a moment of peace, and he wasn't going to waste it. He kept watch as Zarina leaned back against the rock, closing her eyes for a brief rest. The jungle around them was quiet, too quiet, and Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Minutes passed, but it felt like hours. Every rustle of leaves, every distant cry from an unknown creature made his heart race. He was on edge, but he knew they had to keep moving. Zarina's safety was his top priority, and if that meant pushing through his own exhaustion, then that was what he would do. Jackson nodded, his jaw tightening. "Let's move." They continued. Their journey through the jungle, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. The tension between them had grown, the bond between them now impossible to ignore. Jackson could feel Zarina's emotions clearly now. Her fear, her anxiety, but also a flicker of hope. She was still holding on to the belief that they could escape, that they could survive. And somehow Jackson found himself clinging to that hope as well. As they made their way through the thick jungle, they suddenly heard a loud crack in the distance. Jackson's heart skipped a beat. He motioned for Zarina to stop and crouch low behind a cluster of trees. His hand went to the weapon at his side, his fingers tightening around the grip. Zarina's eyes were wide with fear as she glanced around, her psychic abilities reaching out to sense their surroundings. "They're close," she whispered. "I can feel them. They're right behind us." Jackson didn't waste any time. He signaled to Zarina to follow him, and they moved quickly, silently, through the underbrush. The jungle, once their cover, now felt like a trap. The enemies were closing in on them, and they had no choice but to push forward. They needed to get to a safe place, somewhere they could regroup and plan their next move. But there was no safe place out here. Not anymore. Jackson's heart was pounding in his chest as they moved, every sense on high alert. He could feel Zarina's presence beside him, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing second. She was pushing herself harder than she should, her strength barely enough to keep up. But still, she kept moving. She refused to stop. Suddenly, a burst of movement caught Jackson's eye. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving with speed and purpose. Jackson reacted instantly, pushing Zarina to the ground and diving to the side. The soldier was fast, but Jackson was faster. He came at him from the side, landing a punch to the soldier's midsection and knocking him off balance. The soldier stumbled, but before he could recover, Jackson was on him again, grabbing his weapon and disarming him in a single fluid motion. The soldier's eyes widened in surprise, but before he could react, Jackson knocked him out cold with a quick blow to the head. The soldier collapsed to the ground with a soft thud, unconscious. Zarina scrambled to her feet, her face pale with fear but her eyes burning with determination. "How many more?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson didn't answer immediately. He stood, his eyes scanning the jungle for any more movement. They had to keep moving, but he wasn't sure how much longer they could last. Though soldiers were relentless, they would keep coming no matter how many Jackson took down. "We need to get to higher ground," Jackson said, his voice low. "We need a vantage point." Zarina nodded, her face set in a grim expression. Together, they made their way up a steep incline, pushing through the thick foliage until they reached a small clearing at the top. From there, they could see the jungle stretching out in every direction. It wasn't much of a vantage point, but it was better than nothing. Jackson took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the horizon. He could see movement in the distance, figures, moving through the trees, searching for them, but they weren't close yet. For the first time in hours, Jackson allowed himself to relax, just for a moment. "We'll rest here," he said quietly, turning to Zarina. "But we can't stay long." Zarina looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "We won't," she said, "but we have to stop running. We have to make our stand here." Jackson glanced at her, and for the first time, he saw the fire in her eyes. She was ready to fight, and so was he. The jungle stretched out before them, the thick trees and dense underbrush offering only a small sliver of visibility. Jackson and Zarina had taken up position in the clearing, hidden among the large rocks and overgrown foliage. Their backs pressed against the cool stone as they crouched low, waiting for the enemy to come closer. The bond between them pulsed in, the quiet air, a constant reminder of their shared connection. Jackson could feel Zarina's anxiety growing, but there was also something else, a determination, a resolve. She wasn't just running anymore. She wasn't just trying to survive. She was ready to face what was coming. Jackson's own heart raced as he scanned the jungle. The enemy was near. He could hear the soft crunch of leaves underfoot, the low murmurs of the soldiers as they moved through the dense brush. The search was close. He could feel the pressure building, like a storm on the horizon. "They're almost here," Zarina whispered, her voice quiet, but filled with a strange calm. "I can sense them. I can feel their thoughts." Jackson glanced at her. Her eyes were closed, her forehead creased with concentration as she reached out with her mind, trying to detect the soldiers' movements. He knew her abilities had been draining, but they were all they had left. He didn't want her to push herself too hard, but there was no time to argue. "Stay focused," he said, his voice steady. "We'll get through this together." Zarina nodded, her eyes opening to meet his. The bond between them was stronger than ever. He could feel her fear, but also a quiet strength that made him believe they might actually have a chance. If they fought together, maybe, just maybe, they could make it out alive. The first soldier emerged from the trees, a tall figure clad in dark armor. Jackson's breath caught in his throat. They had no cover left now. The soldier was moving toward them, unaware of their presence, but Jackson knew they didn't have the luxury of waiting for him to pass. They had to act fast. Jackson's instincts kicked in. Without a word, he lunged forward, rushing the soldier before he could react. His body collided with the enemy soldiers, sending them both crashing to the ground. The soldier's weapon went flying, but Jackson grabbed it in midair, twisting it out of his hands and forcing the soldier into a tight hold. The soldier struggled, but Jackson was stronger. With one swift motion, he knocked him out cold, sending him crumpling to the ground. But there was no time to celebrate. More soldiers were coming, moving in quickly from every direction. Jackson's heart pounded as he rose to his feet, adrenaline rushing through his veins. "Zarina, get ready!" he shouted, glancing at her. Zarina was already moving, her hands outstretched as she concentrated. Jackson could feel her power surging, the connection between them buzzing with energy. He had never seen her like this before. She was tapping into something deep within her, something raw and unrelenting. The air around her seemed to shimmer as she reached out with her mind. The first soldier to charge at them was flung backward, his body lifted off the ground by Zarina's telekinesis. He crashed into a tree with a sickening thud, unconscious before he hit the ground. Jackson didn't hesitate. He moved in with precision, taking out the next soldier with a quick, decisive strike. His training had kicked in, and every movement felt effortless. There was no time to think. just fight. The battle was chaotic, fast-paced. More soldiers emerged from the jungle, and Zarina's powers flared with each new threat. She was pulling them into the air, throwing them aside, and with every soldier she took down, Jackson could feel her strength wane just a little more. She was pushing herself to her limits, but there was no stopping. "Now! We can't keep this up for long!" Jackson shouted, ducking as another soldier fired at him. He returned fire, taking the soldier down with a well-aimed shot. Zarina's face was pale, her body trembling with exhaustion, but she didn't stop. Her eyes were glowing with an intensity Jackson had never seen before. She was fighting for her life, and for his. "We're almost there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We just need to hold on a little longer." But as she spoke, a new threat emerged from the jungle. The leader of the soldiers, a towering figure clad in dark, imposing armor, stepped forward, his eyes locked on Zarina. He held a weapon unlike any Jackson had seen before, a massive energy rifle that hummed with deadly power. "You think you can escape, princess?" the leader said, his voice cold and mocking. "You're mine now." Zarina's expression hardened, and Jackson could feel her emotions shift. She was angry, furious even. The bond between them flared with intensity, and Jackson could almost feel the heat radiating off her. "No," she said, her voice low and full of defiance. "I'm not yours." With a sudden, forceful gesture, Zarina unleashed all her remaining power. The air around her crackled as she lifted the leader off the ground, her telekinetic grip tightening like a vice. He struggled, his hands reaching for his weapon, but it was no use. Zarina was too strong. With a final, powerful burst of energy, she hurled the leader into a nearby tree, his body slamming into the trunk with a sickening crash. He didn't move. Jackson's breath caught in his throat as he watched Zarina, her face pale but filled with a fierce determination. She had done it. She had won. The remaining soldiers hesitated, fear creeping into their eyes. They knew they were beaten. They didn't have the power to fight against Zarina and Jackson, not anymore. "Leave," Jackson growled, his voice low and commanding. "Now!" The soldiers didn't need to be told twice. They turned and fled, disappearing into the jungle, leaving Jackson and Zarina standing in the clearing, the only sounds the distant cries of the jungle's creatures. Zarina collapsed to her knees, her strength finally giving out. Jackson rushed to her side, his heart pounding in his chest. She was alive. They were both alive. "You did it," Jackson said softly, his voice filled with awe. Zarina looked up at him, her expression tired but relieved. "We did it." For the first time in what felt like forever, Jackson allowed himself to relax. They had survived. Together. The jungle was eerily quiet after the battle. The only sounds left were the soft whispers of the wind through the trees and the distant cries of unseen creatures. Jackson sat beside Zarina, his back against a large tree, still catching his breath from the fight. His heart was still racing, but there was a strange sense of calm settling over him. They had survived. Against all odds, they had fought their way through and come out victorious. But there was still the question of what came next. Zarina was leaning against the same tree, her eyes closed as she rested. She was exhausted, her breathing shallow, but there was a peacefulness in her face now, something Jackson hadn't seen before. The weight of the battle had lifted, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was no one chasing them. No soldiers in the distance, no immediate danger. For a moment, they were just two people, resting in the heart of the jungle, far away from the chaos that had been their lives for so long. Jackson couldn't help but look at her. Despite everything, despite the danger, the pain, and the fear, Zarina had shown strength he hadn't known she had. She was more than a princess to him now. She was a fighter. She had fought to survive just as he had. And in that moment, he realized that the connection they shared wasn't just born out of survival. It was real. There was a bond between them that couldn't be ignored. He didn't know what the future held. The fight with the soldiers wasn't the end. There would be more battles to face, more struggles ahead. But for now, it felt like a new beginning. Zarina opened her eyes slowly, sensing his gaze on her. She smiled weakly, though her eyes still held a shadow of the pain she was carrying. "I thought it would be harder," she said softly, her voice quiet but steady. Jackson raised an eyebrow, surprised by her words. "What do you mean?" She looked out toward the jungle, her gaze distant. "I thought that after everything, I thought I wouldn't be able to feel anything again. I thought it would break me." She paused, taking a slow breath. "But it didn't. It's like I'm still whole." Jackson nodded slowly. He understood that. He had felt something similar during the fight. Even in the midst of everything, he hadn't broken. There was something in him, something he hadn't realized before, that kept him going. It was the same thing that kept Zarina going. "I don't think it's about being broken," Jackson said softly. "I think it's about finding a way to stay strong, even when everything's falling apart." Zarina turned her head to look at him, her blue eyes steady and calm. "And you're strong. I can feel it. It's not just physical strength. It's something else." Jackson felt a flicker of heat rise in his chest at her words. He had never been the type to accept praise easily, but there was something about Zarina that made him feel different. She wasn't just thanking him for saving her life, she was acknowledging the bond between them. The bond that had formed in the heat of battle, in their shared struggle to survive. "We've both been through a lot," Jackson said after a pause, his voice steady, "and we'll keep facing whatever comes. Together." Zarina smiled, a small, tired smile that held more meaning than any words. She didn't need to say anything else. They both knew what that meant. They were in this together for better or for worse. But the moment of peace didn't last long. The quiet that had settled over them was soon broken by the sound of movement in the trees. Jackson's heart skipped a beat. He stood up immediately, reaching for his weapon, eyes scanning the jungle for any signs of danger. Zarina was on her feet in an instant, her expression alert. "We need to go," she said quickly. "They're coming. They won't stop." Jackson nodded, his instincts kicking in. He knew it wasn't over. They had been lucky to survive the last encounter, but luck didn't last forever. There was always another danger around the corner. The soldiers had been defeated, but there were still those who wanted to capture Zarina, to use her powers for their own gain. They weren't going to let her escape so easily. "Where do we go now?" Jackson asked, his eyes scanning the jungle for a route. "They couldn't stay here. Not with the enemy closing in." Zarina's gaze shifted to the horizon, her expression focused. "There's a place," she said, her voice low and certain. "A safe house. It's hidden, but it's far from here. We can get there before they find us." Jackson didn't hesitate. "Lead the way." Without another word, Zarina began to move, her steps slow but determined. Jackson followed closely behind her, his eyes scanning every shadow, every rustling leaf, every movement that might signal danger. The jungle was alive with sounds, but it felt as though everything was closing in on them, as if the very earth beneath their feet was conspiring to keep them trapped. As they moved, Jackson couldn't help but glance at Zarina, his mind racing. He wasn't sure if they would make it to the safe house. He wasn't sure if there was even a place where they could truly be safe. But as long as they kept moving, as long as they stayed together, there was hope. There had to be. They pushed through the thick jungle, moving swiftly but carefully. The path ahead wasn't easy, but they didn't stop. They couldn't afford to stop. They were both exhausted, but there was something stronger than physical pain driving them forward. It was the connection between them, the bond they had formed. the bond that kept them alive. Minutes turned to hours as they traveled through the dense undergrowth. The jungle seemed endless, a vast, unyielding wilderness that offered no comfort. But Jackson didn't feel fear anymore. He felt something different, something that came from knowing they had a chance. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about something more, about a future they could build together. And as they reached the edge of the jungle, where the trees started to thin, Jackson knew they had a long road ahead. But for the first time, he felt ready to face whatever came next.